Okay, this verse from Surah Al-Ahzab, I'm just going to read it for you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما أحدوا والله عليه فمنهم من قضى. I'm sorry, I'm not going to continue because it seems like on my screen the Arabic is not written properly, so I'm just going to read the translation. We might be able to find it later on. It's from Surah Al-Ahzab, which is Surah 33, verse number 23. And what it says is, among the believers are men who fulfill what they have pledged to Allah. Of those men are some who have fulfilled their pledge, and of them are some who still wait, and they have not changed in their commitment in the least. Okay. So this, and before we continue any further, I'm just going to acknowledge that these lessons are from the MCE syllabus that some of you are using in madrasa. This is the digital version, and we're going to be learning from these lessons over the next few nights. So this lesson has some keywords. One of the keywords is ashab, which means companions. Another keyword is basira, which means insight. So these are the two main keywords for tonight. Okay, see if you can remember them. Basira and ashab, which means companions. So remember, we are talking about the companions of Imam Hussein, the ashab of Imam Hussein, alayhi salam. Okay. A companion is someone whom we spend a lot of time with. As we've just seen, the Arabic word for companions is ashab. On his journey to Karbala, Imam Hussein was accompanied by a number of individuals, including his family, friends, followers, and supporters. These were the people who believed in him as the Imam of their time and supported him in his mission. They had pledged their allegiance to Imam Hussein. Remember, we talked about allegiance yesterday, and we learned what the Arabic word was for allegiance. Does anyone remember? Yes, Isa? Bay'ah. Very good. Well done. As Imam Hussein traveled across the lands from Medina to Mecca and then across Arabia, the number of Imam Hussein's companions changed as people joined and left his caravan. Those who joined him were drawn towards him by his akhlaq, by his taqwa, and his stand for truth, while those who left Imam Hussein's caravan were afraid of defeat. Who were they going to be defeated by, do you think? Yes, Ali? Correct. Imam Hussein was going to be facing Yazid because he had refused to give allegiance or bay'ah to Yazid. So those people who left Imam Hussein's caravan were scared because they thought Yazid was going to defeat Imam Hussein. After the death of Imam Hussein's cousin Muslim ibn Aqil, the number of companions reduced even further. By the time Imam Hussein reached the land of Karbala, he had only about 54 companions with him. Imam Hussein's companions were tested many times during the journey. After the death of Muslim ibn Aqil, and remember the way the people of Kufa changed their minds and they decided to pledge allegiance to Yazid and not support Imam Hussein anymore. Some of those companions who were with Imam Hussein left him because, as we said earlier, they were scared that Yazid would defeat Imam Hussein, and they were scared of being defeated and killed. Imam's companions were also tested again on the night of Ashura, when Imam Hussein said that to his companions, he said that, I am freeing you from any duties or obligations towards me. If you want to leave, you can leave. It's dark, it's nighttime, and you may leave. Imam Hussein told his companions that, be aware that I believe the enemies, that is Yazid and his army, will begin the battle with us tomorrow. And I have freed you from any duties or obligations towards me, so you can leave if you want. use the darkness of the night to depart. And what Imam Hussein did was he turned out all the light, the lamps, so that it was dark. And if anyone wanted to leave, they could leave. Why do you think he made it dark so that people could leave in the dark? Yes, Fatima? So no one would feel ashamed. If they wanted to leave, they could leave without anyone looking at them and judging them. What do you think happened? Imam Hussein's companions responded, or they replied by saying that they were going to be loyal to him, and no matter what was going to come, they were going to be brave and noble companions. They had taqwa, and they joined Imam Hussein to protect his life and his mission. Some of the attributes or qualities of the companions of Imam Hussein, you can see them, I don't know if you can see them on the screen in front of you. Some of those qualities were things like taqwa, loyalty, bravery, friendship, ikhlas, which means sincerity, physical strength, they were very strong, spirituality, confidence, honesty, respect towards others, contentment, strong iman or faith in Allah, courage, love of the Ahlul Bayt, and steadfastness. Okay, so these were some of the qualities of Imam Hussein's companions. Let us look at one of the companions of Imam Hussein, whose name was Nafi ibn Hilal. Nafi ibn Hilal was one of the bravest soldiers of Imam Hussein. He was from Kufa, and he had been a companion of Imam Ali and Imam Hassan as well. So he had been a believer of the Ahlul Bayt and a supporter of the Ahlul Bayt for many, many years. Nafi was known because he was reliable, he was honest, and he could also narrate hadith. So when there was a hadith, when the Prophet would say something or when the Imams would say something, people who were listening could either write down what was said or they would remember it by heart. And then when somebody said, what somebody would ask them later, what did the Prophet say on this day about this subject? Or somebody said, what did Imam Ali say about such and such thing? The narrator of the hadith would be able to repeat those things either by looking at what they had written or by remembering what they had heard. So Nafi ibn Hilal was a very good narrator of hadith because he remembered the hadith or either he had written it down. In this journey to Karbala, Nafi was very blessed. He felt that he was blessed to be Imam Hussein's companion, and he gave Imam Hussein his word, his bay'ah, that he would stand firmly with Imam Hussein. On the day of Ashura, Nafi said to Imam Hussein, we love those who love you and we hate those who hate you, because we are firm in our determination, our wisdom, and our basira, insight. That's one of our keywords for today. When the battle of Karbala took place on the day of Ashura, Nafi entered the battle with another of Imam Hussein's companions called Muslim ibn Awsaja. When Nafi fell from his horse, he was taken as a prisoner by Shimr, who was from Yazid's army, a very cruel man. And Shimr took Nafi and off the battlefield and he killed him there. Now, even during the last moments of Nafi's life, he spoke bravely to Shimr. He tried to remind Shimr that Shimr had a duty towards Allah. And he said to Shimr, if you are really a Muslim, you wouldn't be able to stand before Allah on the day of judgment with your hands drenched in blood, the blood of Imam Hussein and his companions. This is the type of brave and honorable companion that Imam Hussein had. And this is why Imam Hussein says, I do not know of any companions more loyal and better than mine. No family members more truthful and confident than mine. Now let's talk about Basira. We said that Basira means deep insight. Insight is the ability to see beneath the surface. It happens when we apply our knowledge. So insight means not just to see what's happening on the outside of something, but to think about it deeply and to look at what it means, to look and think and to apply what we know and to try and work out what everything means. How do you think we can develop basira? One of the ways in which we can develop basira is to spend our time gaining knowledge and learning about Islam and taking the time to understand the Quran, not just reading the Quran, but reading it in English, not just in Arabic, and then trying to understand what it means and to learn about the lives of the Ahlul Bayt and why they did and behaved the way they did. Another way of developing basira is to practice taqwa. What is taqwa? Taqwa means to be pious. Someone who has taqwa is someone who is pious. What does piety mean? Piety means to be aware or conscious that Allah is great and He has authority over us. The first step towards taqwa is to practice putting Allah first in our lives before our own desires and our own wishes. When we avoid sins for the sake of Allah, when we avoid sins because we know that Allah would not be happy if we did them, then we are practicing taqwa. Can you think of an example of something that you might want to do which is not right? Yes, Sakina? Instead of? Very good. Instead of sitting around when you could be helping mom, that is doing something good instead of wasting time. Very good. Did you have something else, Fatima? Okay, let me give you an example that I thought of. When it's time for prayers, sometimes we might be busy doing other things. It's Maghrib time and mom says, come on, Isa, it's time to pray. And Isa might be playing soccer. Do you play soccer, Isa? Yeah. Isa might be practicing kicking or something like that, or he might be watching TV, or he might be reading a book. And he really doesn't want to stop doing that because he enjoys that. But it's time to pray, and praying on time is what Allah would like us to do. So when Isa decides that he's going to stop playing soccer and go to pray because it's namaz time, then he is putting Allah first. And by doing that, Isa is practicing piety and taqwa. So those are the ways. That is one example of a way that we can practice taqwa. As we begin to develop basira or insight, then we begin to see things at a deeper level, and we begin to understand things beyond the shallow surface. Okay? So this is one thing that Nafi ibn Hilal had. He had basira. He was able to see beyond what everyone else could see because he was thinking about things in a deep way rather than just a superficial way. Now let's look at one of the other companions of Imam Hussein. There's a bit of a story over here, and this story is about someone called Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, who was one of the companions of Imam Hussein in Karbala, but he was from Kufa. And Sa'id met Muslim ibn Aqil when Muslim arrived in Kufa, and he told Muslim that I will pledge allegiance to you and Imam Hussein. What Muslim did was he told Sa'id, then take this letter to Imam Hussein, deliver it to Imam Hussein. And so Sa'id prepared for the journey because remember he had to travel because Imam Hussein was in Medina, and then he left Medina and went to Makkah, and then he was going to be traveling to Kufa. And so Sa'id knew there was a journey. He prepared himself and he had this letter in a safe place with him. The journey through the desert was very long and very difficult. And at one place, Sa'id got tired and he saw an oasis. Do you know what an oasis is? It's a place in a desert where there's a pond and there's trees and you can have shade and drink some water and have a rest if you need to, if you're tired. So when Sa'id saw this, he decided that he was going to jump into the water and refresh himself, and he took his horse as well towards that pond of cold water. And then after that, he rested under a tree for a while and he fell asleep. Because he had traveled a long way from Kufa, carrying this very important document from Muslim ibn Aqil for Imam Hussein, he fell asleep. Suddenly he heard the sound of his horse and he realized that he had a mission to accomplish. He had to take this letter and deliver it to Imam Hussein. So he jumped up, looked around quickly, and he checked that he had the letter in his armor, and then he continued on his journey. It was a desert and it was very, very hot. Around midday, Sa'id saw the caravan of Imam Hussein approaching, and he was very pleased that he had finally caught up with Imam Hussein. He greeted him respectfully, and he gave him this very important letter from Muslim. The letter contained Muslim's latest news from the city of Kufa for Imam Hussein. Sa'id asked Imam Hussein his permission to join his caravan. He said, "Can I join you and your caravan and come towards Kufa?" And Imam Hussein agreed and allowed Sa'id to stay with his caravan. Sa'id was part of Imam's army, as they gathered against the army of Yazid in Karbala. Because remember, by the time Imam Hussein was going towards Kufa, the people of Kufa had changed their mind and they refused to pledge allegiance anymore. They changed their mind and changed sides and went on Yazid's side. So Sa'id was one of those companions of Imam Hussein who stayed faithful with him and ended up in Karbala with him. And along with Imam Hussein, his family and other companions, Sa'id spent the night of Ashura in the remembrance of Allah. When the lights went out, he didn't leave. He stayed there on the day of Ashura. As Imam was offering his Dhuhr prayers, the enemy was firing arrows towards Imam Hussein, and what Sa'id did was he defended Imam Hussein using his body as a shield. And then this is how Sa'id became a shuhada, became a shaheed, as soon as the namaz ended, because he had used his body to save and protect Imam Hussein, so that Imam Hussein would not be hit by the arrows during the namaz. Now we're going to talk about a companion of Imam Hussein that we talked about yesterday, whose name was Hur. Do you remember Hur? Do you remember what we talked about Hur yesterday? No? Okay, let's see. Hur was the person that Imam Hussein had met on his way to Kufa. And remember, Hur's army and Hur's horses were very thirsty. You remember, Sakina? And Imam Hussein and his army offered water to Hur's men and to Hur's horses. And when it was time for Dhuhr Salah, Imam Hussein asked Hur and his companions whether they would like to join Imam Hussein and his companions for prayers, or whether they would like to pray separately. And Hur replied that he wanted to offer Salah with Imam Hussein. Why do you think Hur prayed Salah behind Imam Hussein? Remember, Hur's job at that point was to stop Imam Hussein's army from returning back to Medina, because by this time Imam had found out that the people of Kufa were not going to support him, and Imam Hussein wanted to return to Medina, but Hur's army stopped Imam Hussein from going back towards Medina to safety. And in the end, Imam Hussein decided to go to Karbala. So Hur was actually part of Yazid's army, and his job was to stop Imam Hussein from returning to Medina to safety. But Hur agreed to pray behind Imam Hussein. Why do you think he did that? Yes, Ali? Yes, he was impressed by Imam Hussein's akhlaq and good behavior and generosity in giving him water and his horses water. Were you going to say something different? Similar things? Yeah. Hur knew that Imam Hussein was the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, and Hur knew that Prophet Muhammad was a very honorable person. He was the Prophet of Allah. And being his grandson, Imam Hussein was also a very honorable person. Hur had a lot of respect for Imam Hussein. So even though he was part of Yazid's army, Hur knew that Imam Hussein was somebody who stood for Islam and stood for the same values that Prophet Muhammad had talked about in his our Islamic values. And like you said, Hur, since his arrival in Karbala, saw how Hur was impressed with Imam Hussein's kindness in giving water as well. Now, when Imam Hussein's army arrived in Karbala, Hur saw how his family and his companions were being treated badly by the forces of Yazid for the 9 days before Ashura. And Hur felt responsible for the position they were in because he had forced them to come towards Karbala. Since the beginning of the day of Ashura, Hur had been thinking about changing sides. What sides? He was thinking of leaving Yazid's side and going towards Imam Hussein. One of the soldiers who was with Hur in Yazid's army said to Hur, "Your behavior is very suspicious. Wallah, I have never seen you acting like this before." Muhajir thought that Hur wanted to leave because he was scared of fighting. Muhajir said, "If I was asked who was one of the bravest people of Kufa, I would normally say it's you, Hur. But today I see that you want to leave Yazid's army. What is going on?" Hur replied, "Wallah, I am giving my soul the choice between heaven and the fire of hell. By Allah, I will not choose anything but heaven. Even if I'm going to be cut into pieces and burnt, I'm going to go on the side of heaven." What had Hur realized? Hur had realized that Imam Hussein was on the side of the truth and Yazid was on the side of falsehood. It was a choice between heaven and hell, right? So the side of Imam Hussein was the side of heaven because Imam Hussein was on the side of Allah and the side of heaven. And by following Yazid, Hur had realized that he would be on the side of the fire of hell. So what Hur said was, "By Allah, if I had known that they," meaning Yazid and his army, "would finish by doing what I am seeing them do," meaning that they were mistreating Imam Hussein, his family and companions, and they were going to fight against them and kill them, Hur said, "I would not have done what I had done." This is when Hur went to Imam Hussein. He apologized to Imam Hussein. He asked for forgiveness. He said, "If I had known that Yazid and Yazid's army were going to behave like this towards you, I would not have stopped you from going back to Medina. I would not have forced you to come to Karbala. I repent to Allah for what I have done, and I am sorry, and I'm asking you for forgiveness," he said to Imam Hussein. He asked Imam Hussein, "Will you accept my forgiveness?" Imam Hussein replied, "Yes, Hur, I will forgive you." And what happened next was that Hur fought alongside Imam Hussein and became one of the martyrs of Karbala. When we make mistakes, do we recognize that we have done something wrong? And when we do something wrong to someone, are we brave enough to admit, like Hur, that we were wrong? And do we ask that person for forgiveness and ask Allah for forgiveness? This is something that we should do. Looking at Hur's example, we should remember that if we do something wrong, we should be able to swallow our pride and ask for forgiveness. When we do something that Allah is not happy with, we should always ask Allah for forgiveness. How should we repent? How should we ask for forgiveness? What sort of things do you think we could do? Yes, Fatima? You could pray to Allah. Do you know a word or two words that you say sometimes which mean that you are saying sorry to Allah? You know? Very good, Shayan. Astaghfirullah is something that we say when we want to repent to Allah, when we want to say that we are sorry. Now, I'm just going to go back a couple of pages to show you this word, tawbah. Have you heard of the word tawbah? Tawbah means to turn to Allah. in asking for forgiveness. So when we are sorry and we want to ask Allah for forgiveness, we do tawbah. And one of the ways of doing tawbah is by saying astaghfirullah. You could take your tasbih and you could do a tasbih of astaghfirullah, the same way that you do a tasbih after your prayers when you say Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah, Subhan. You could do astaghfirullah as a tasbih, or you could just say it a few times when you want to say sorry to Allah. When we sincerely ask Allah for forgiveness, then what happens? Allah turns to us with mercy and compassion. Okay. Now, let's quickly look at a couple of other companions of Imam Hussein. Another companion of Imam Hussein who had also been a companion of Rasulullah, so he was quite old because Anas ibn Harith had been alive since the time of Prophet Muhammad, and he was still alive even after Prophet Muhammad died, and he became a companion of Imam Hussein as well. Anas was very generous and very pious. And one good thing about Anas was that he only spoke when it was necessary. He didn't talk a lot, he didn't chat with his friends, he didn't make jokes and do lots of what we call this. He only spoke when it was very necessary. And in spite of the fact, as I said, that he was old, he accompanied Imam Hussein to Karbala and fought bravely by his side. On the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein respected Anas as a companion of his grandfather, the Prophet. And because he knew that Anas only spoke when it was very necessary, so people knew that Anas was a man who spoke few words, but his words were very important. Imam Hussein asked Anas to speak to the enemy, to the army of Yazid, and to try and make them realize that what they were doing was not right, and to realize the truth. Another companion that we can talk about is Habib ibn Madahir. Have you heard of Habib ibn Madahir? Habib ibn Madahir was a friend of Imam Hussein from the time Imam Hussein was a child. When Imam Hussein knew that he was going to Karbala, he wrote a letter to Habib and he asked him, Habib, can you join me in Karbala? Imam Hussein's words, when they reached Habib, when Habib received the letter, his eyes started to cry because he realized that his old friend had reached out to him for help. Habib shared the contents of the letter with his family, and his wife told Habib, straight away you should go and join Imam Hussein. Habib was in Kufa, and the whole of Kufa was surrounded by the troops of Ibn Ziyad, because remember, Ibn Ziyad had turned the people of Kufa against Imam Hussein by threatening them. But what Habib was able to do was he was able to sneak out and leave without being stopped by Ibn Ziyad's men, and he rushed towards Karbala. When Habib entered Karbala, Imam Hussein ran to meet his old friend and gave him a big hug. And Habib ibn Madahir wasn't young like a lot of Imam Hussein's companions, but he was brave and he had left everything, his family, all that he had to do in Kufa, and rushed towards Imam because he was a friend, he was a good friend. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Have you heard that? When you need help and someone helps you, then that is a person who is your true friend. And that is what Habib ibn Madahir was like. Now, there is an ayah in the Quran in a surah called Surah Ash-Shura, which is the 42nd surah, and this is verse number 23. It says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. And this is something which Allah told Prophet Muhammad. He said, say, I do not ask any reward for it except the love of my relatives. When Prophet Muhammad said this, he was telling the people, the Muslim Ummah at that time, that he did not want any reward for all the things that he had done for the Muslims, except for one thing. And that thing was the love of his relatives. Who were the relatives of the Prophet Muhammad? His Ahlul Bayt. So in this verse, Allah shows us that by loving the Prophet's relatives, by loving the Ahlul Bayt, that we were going to follow Allah's command. When Prophet Muhammad was asked, after he said this verse, when he was asked, who are your near ones, who are your relatives? He replied, Ali, Fatima, and her two sons, Hassan and Hussein. By showing kindness and love towards the family of Rasulullah, we are showing that we are good Muslims or true Muslims. And it is through the love of the Ahlul Bayt that we can also develop our good character, because the Ahlul Bayt were role models for us. And by looking at how they behaved, we can learn how we should be behaving and how we could be good Muslims. We're finishing up very quickly. So just talking very quickly about loving the Ahlul Bayt. This is a time for us to think and reflect. Remember when we talked about basira and insight? We gain basira by thinking and reflecting upon things. Whom do you love a lot? Whom do you love? Anyone? Yes, Anya? You love your family, your parents and your sisters and brothers. Would you do anything to hurt the people you love? No. The Ahlul Bayt have shown us that they were the best of all morals. They were the people that Prophet Muhammad loved, and they were the people that Allah loved. And so we would do what they want us to do. We see the attributes of Allah reflected in the behavior of the Ahlul Bayt, and we love the Ahlul Bayt because we find these qualities are very good. Remember how Hur was drawn to Imam Hussein through his kindness, and he agreed to pray behind Imam Hussein because Imam Hussein had been generous to Hur and Hur's army and Hur's thirsty horses. In the same way, when we see the Ahlul Bayt and we see their good qualities, we are drawn towards these good qualities and morals that they have. We love Imam Ali because he is humble, he was brave. We love Imam Muhammad Baqir because he had a lot of knowledge. We love Imam Musa al-Kadhim because he had patience. We love Imam Hussein because he was willing to sacrifice everything he loved, his family, his companions, and his own life for the sake of Allah. Imam Hussein inspired many generations after him to stand up to injustice and fight for humanity. The Ahlul Bayt instilled these values within themselves, and they developed a very close and special relationship with Allah. Imam Hussein loved Allah to a great extent, and this love is reflected also in the behavior of his companions. So just to quickly end, let's have a quick look at the key points that we have learned in this majlis today. We talked about Imam Hussein's companions, and we saw how they were brave and noble. They had qualities like taqwa, and they had joined Imam Hussein to protect Imam Hussein's life and uphold his values. The companions of Imam Hussein were drawn towards Imam Hussein because of Imam Hussein's taqwa and akhlaq and willingness to sacrifice everything he loved for the pleasure of Allah. Through their actions and their words, Imam Hussein's companions demonstrated the values of kindness, compassion, courage, honesty, respect, loyalty, and friendship. We should try and find these values in ourselves. Do you think that you are honest? And do you think you could be loyal? Do you think you can be brave and respectful and kind and a good friend? If you think you can do those things, then you have the same qualities as the companions of Imam Hussein had on that day. And remember, they were the companions of the Imam of their time. And if we want to be the companions of the Imam of our time, then we need to have some of these qualities in ourselves as well. So to end, let us remember our Imam and let us recite the dua for the safety of our Imam together. You know that dua? Let's recite it together, loudly. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم كن لي وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وذليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Who's the other one? Can you do that? Thank you very much for being a very patient and good audience today, in spite of the fact that it was quite long and I can see some of you were yawning. Now you can go back and you can sit with your parents, okay, for the rest of the majlis. Thank you. See you tomorrow night, inshallah. The two words were ashab, which means companions. Would you like to say that? Ashab and basira. Okay. I'll ask you tomorrow